Ever get this, like, nagging feeling that something's just deeply wrong with how things work?
It is an unsettling feeling, right?
Yeah, like, you can sense it, especially with these big, messy systems,
Hmm.
when they go off the rails, but you just can't, like, put your finger on it.
It's almost as if, the way these systems are designed, it's like it prevents us from figuring out who's really responsible.
Exactly. Like, that whole thing with Fox News, the Dominion lawsuit after the 2020 election, something was definitely off, but good luck holding anyone accountable.
Textbook example, really. It's what Dan Davies, he's the author we're diving into today, calls crimes without criminals.
Crimes without criminals. Okay, that's an interesting way to put it.
Right. And Davies, he knows a thing or two about financial fraud, by the way. He says these situations, often it's not about some big conspiracy or a bunch of bad apples. It's about systems,
Yeah.
systems that are built in a way that kind of shields individuals from consequences.
So hold on. It's not about evil masterminds. It's more like these systems just happen to let people off the hook.
Exactly. Think back to 2008, the financial crisis. It wasn't just a couple of rogue traders
Right.
going wild.
Right.
Davies calls this self-organizing control fraud, basically. Unrealistic expectations meet, like totally lacks oversight. Creates this situation where fraudulent behavior, almost inevitable, even if no one actually planned it that way.
Okay, so the system itself, you're saying, the system itself encouraged people to behave badly, even if nobody actually set out to break the law.
You got it. And this isn't just some abstract financial world problem. Think about like your own life. Ever come across a situation, maybe at work or something, where some rule, some totally rigid rule, leads to a completely ridiculous outcome?
Oh, all the time. Especially, dealing with customer service. You try to explain a problem and it's like, sorry, it's policy. Like, common sense just flew out the window.
And that, my friend, is a perfect example of what Davies calls accountability sinks.
Accountability sinks.
Yeah, these are like systems, they're designed to deflect blame, and they make sure any feedback never actually changes anything in the future.
The worst. But this goes way beyond annoying customer service, right? I mean, Davies uses a pretty intense example. The KLM squirrel incident.
Ah, yes, the squirrel ant.
A tragic case of a well-intentioned system going totally off the rails.
Absolutely.
For those who haven't heard the story, KLM was flying like hundreds of squirrels, right?
Yeah.
And they were stuck at Amsterdam's airport because of some paperwork issue. And here's the kicker. KLM ended up having to euthanize all of the squirrels because of this like rigid policy.
Yeah.
It totally didn't account for a situation like that.
What's important here is that KLM, they didn't actually want to euthanize these squirrels. In fact, they even admitted that the order, the way it was given, totally unethical. But the system, you see, the system was designed to protect each employee, right, from having to make that call. And it ended up causing this awful outcome.
It's like the system itself is designed to fail,
Yeah.
at least when it comes to taking responsibility.
Wow, that's a really interesting way to put it. And it's where the field of cybernetics comes in. It studies how systems operate. And one of the really key figures in cybernetics was Stafford Beer. His work helped us understand how this whole diffusion of responsibility thing happens.
Cybernetics. Okay, that sounds a little intimidating. How complicated are we talking?
It might sound complicated, yeah, but at its core, it's about understanding how systems work and how they sometimes don't. Imagine trying to improve education, right? Like, how do you improve the education of soldiers with their very limited time on a base? That's something Beer tackled.
Okay, I think I see where this is going. But how do you apply cybernetics to, like, education?
Well, Beer had this very interesting approach. He believed in treating systems like black boxes. Instead of getting lost in what individuals are thinking or feeling, he focused on what he could actually observe. What goes in, what comes out, and how to make that process better. Like, he noticed that soldiers often struggled with typical academics, but they could easily grasp complex calculations when it came to gambling on horse races.
No way. So instead of forcing them into some traditional academic box, he worked with what they were already kind of drawn to.
Exactly. He adapted to the system that was already in place. And this focus on, like, observable actions and outcomes, the black box approach, became central to his work.
So how does this black box idea connect to this unaccountability machine? Because we're only looking at what's on the surface. Wouldn't it be almost impossible to tell who's really responsible when something goes wrong inside that box?
You're absolutely right. It's as if the system itself is a shield, protecting everyone on the inside. And here's where it gets even more interesting, because this whole what not who thing, it's not just about like customer service fails or tragic squirrel situations. This is where economics comes in. Another seemingly unrelated field.
Okay, now I'm lost. Economics. What does economics have to do with unaccountability?
More than you'd think. At its core, economics is about optimization. Like, how do we find the most efficient solutions?
Right.
But, and this is key, it often uses these simplified models of how the world works. And those models, they don't always take into account like actual human behavior, the messy reality.
So it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. Trying to make reality fit the model, not the other way around. And that oversimplification, it can have wild consequences. Davies calls this the Ricardian vice, which basically means economists. They sometimes forget their models are just that, models, not the real deal.
Okay, I need an example. What does this Ricardian vice look like in practice?
Think about international trade. A lot of traditional economic models, they make it seem way too simple. Like labor and resources can just flow freely between countries.
Right, like pieces on a chessboard.
Exactly. But we know that's not how it works in the real world. Every country's different rules, costs, resources.
Totally.
And so this oversimplification, this Ricardian vice, it can lead to policies that look great on paper, but completely ignore the real world, which leads to, you guessed it, unintended consequences and a lack of accountability.
It's like those cooking shows where they make it look so easy, but then you try it at home and it's a disaster.
Perfect analogy. And this gap between the model and reality, it plays a huge role in what Davies calls the perils of financialization.
Financialization, there's another word that sounds intimidating. Break it down for me.
Basically, it's about the rise of financial markets and this idea of shareholder value above everything else.
So instead of companies focusing on, making good products, they're just obsessed with making their stock prices go up.
You got it. And that laser focus on short-term profit, it often comes at a cost. Long-term investment, stability, all that. Out the window. What do you think gets sacrificed in that pursuit of shareholder value?
Let me guess. Accountability.
Bingo! It's a sugar high, a quick burst of energy, and then you crash. Hard. Davies uses Jack Welch, his time at GE, as like the ultimate example of this shareholder value thing and the unintended consequences.
Jack Welch, legendary CEO. So what's the downside of his approach? Because at the time, it seemed crazy successful.
Well, yeah, Welch. He did achieve huge short-term gains, but that focus on shareholder value, it meant prioritizing immediate profits over long-term stability. Like, think aggressive cost-cutting, outsourcing, this obsessive focus on quarterly earnings.
So the stock price might have looked amazing in the short term, but the long-term health of the company and the employees suffered.
Exactly. And this whole shift towards shareholder value, it had another kind of sneaky effect. It really destabilized the relationship between investors and workers.
Relationship. Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, there used to be this understanding, right? If you worked hard, contributed to a company's success, you'd share in the rewards.
Right.
But this whole financialization thing, it chipped away at that. Suddenly, it was all about squeezing every last drop of profit for shareholders.
Workers went from partners to, what, pawns?
Expendable resources. Which is harsh, but it's the truth. And this breakdown is a huge part of what we're seeing today. Inequality, that sense of powerlessness, social unrest.
So all those things, rising inequality, political polarization, this feeling that the system is rigged against us, it's all connected to this unaccountability machine.
In a way, yeah. When your systems are designed to protect those at the top from any consequences, it creates ripples. And those ripples, they affect every level of society.
Yeah.
And that's where Davies connects all of this to our current political climate, to this feeling that things are just thought off.
It's like a virus, right? Infecting everything. But if it really is this embedded, is there even any hope? Can we actually fix it?
Well, Davies does offer some hope. He says this growing awareness, right? The fact that we're even having this conversation, that's a sign of progress. It means we can start asking more from these systems, pushing for transparency, for actual accountability.
So it's about reclaiming our agency as individuals and as a society. It's about not accepting the status quo and actually demanding better from the systems that shape our lives.
Exactly. And this is where technology, maybe even something like AI, could help. Davies thinks if we use it thoughtfully, ethically, it could help us build systems that are actually more responsive, more accountable.
So not AI as a replacement for human judgment, but as a way to make that judgment better.
Right. Imagine, like, AI could track the impact of policies as they're happening, flagging unintended consequences before they blow up. It could be a powerful tool to hold these massive systems accountable, to make sure they're serving people, not the other way around.
That's a powerful vision and something to strive for sure. But as we're talking, I keep thinking about this idea of living in the morbid symptoms. What did Davies actually mean by that?
He was talking about that feeling so many of us have,
Yeah.
that sense of powerlessness, the distrust. Like, we're trapped in this system that's just out of control.
Right.
He's saying these aren't just, like, personal anxieties. They're symptoms of a much deeper problem, a system where accountability is an afterthought.
So it's not just in our heads, it's systemic.
Exactly. But, and this is important, recognizing those symptoms, understanding where they come from, that's the first step to finding a cure. By shining a light on these systems, by demanding better, we can actually start to heal. We can create a world where accountability isn't some luxury, it's just not expected.
So it's a call to action then. It's on us to understand these systems, to ask the hard questions and demand more from the people in charge.
Absolutely. Because like Davies reminds us, we're not just along for the ride. We have the power to choose where we go from here.
And it's a good place to leave it for today's look into the unaccountability machine. Hopefully this is giving you a new way to think about the forces shaping our world and, honestly, giving you a little push to challenge the status quo.
Remember, change starts with awareness. It's on all of us to demand a future where we can actually hold these systems accountable.
Until next time, keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and keep pushing for a world where accountability isn't a privilege, it's a right. He developed this, the viable system model, right? And it's like these core functions, right, that any organization needs to like actually survive. Almost like, I don't know, essential organs in a living thing.
Fascinating model, yeah. And you can apply it to all sorts of things.
All right.
Even something as, seemingly simple as an orchestra.
Okay, an orchestra. I'm intrigued.
So picture an orchestra, like a system, right? You've got all these talented musicians, each one with their own skills, their instruments. But they need to work together somehow to create something beautiful, right?
Right. It would be total chaos if everyone just started playing whatever they wanted.
Exactly, that's where the conductor comes in. That's like Beer's System 2 in action. But it's not just about one person calling all the shots. It's about this balance, this crucial balance between like autonomy and control.
Okay, yeah.
The musicians need the freedom to like interpret the music, to bring in their own style, but they still have to work within that framework, right? They have to be accountable to the conductor, to the vision of the piece as a whole.
I'm seeing it. It's like those accountability sinks we were talking about earlier. If the system's too rigid, too inflexible, it can't adapt.
Right.
It can't handle anything it wasn't explicitly designed for. But then if you have too much freedom, not enough accountability, the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly. That's the tightrope we're walking with these big, complex systems. Finding that sweet spot between autonomy and accountability. Because when that balance is off, that's when we see those breakdowns, those crimes without criminals.
So it's not just about designing a system that works on paper. It's about factoring in the human element, right? That need for both freedom and accountability. But, okay, knowing all of this, what can we actually do? These systems, they feel so massive, so resistant to any kind of change. Is there any way to make them more, I don't know, responsive, more human?
Big question. But Davies argues that just being aware of these issues, the fact that we're even having this conversation, that's a step in the right direction. It means we can start demanding more. We can push for these systems to be more transparent, more accountable.
So it's about kind of taking back control, right?
Yeah.
Individually and as a society.
Yeah.
We can't just accept things the way they are. We have to demand better from these systems.
Yeah.
The ones that shape our entire world.
Yes. And this is interesting, but this is where technology might actually help. Davies thinks that, AI, for example, if we use it ethically, thoughtfully, it could help us design systems that are actually more responsive, more accountable.
So not AI taking over for human judgment, but actually improving it, helping us see the things we might miss on our own.
Yes. Like imagine AI that could track the real-world effects of different policies, as they're happening. It could flag unintended consequences early on, maybe even suggest other solutions. It could be amazing. A real tool for accountability, making sure these big systems serve people, not the other way around.
That's a really powerful thought. And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into the unaccountability machine. We hope this episode has given you a new way to think about all of this. And honestly, a little push to get out there and shake things up a bit.
Exactly. Don't forget, change always starts with awareness. It's on all of us to demand better, to demand a future where we can hold these systems and the people running them accountable.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning everything, and let's keep pushing for a world where accountability isn't some, like, far-off dream. It's just reality.